that's what I'm going to try and say something intelligent about today. The idea of simulating the loss of the daily engagement with a socio-cultural environment in language learning and in EAP delivery. Okay, so today's central question, there it is. That's my formulation of what I'm going to try and address. Okay, and from that there's a sort of a secondary consideration on looking ahead in the theme of the conference, which I guess is that. So whatever answers we get to simulating or replacing somehow the experience of a daily encounter with an Anglophone environment, can any of that be helpful as we kind of move ahead and indeed at some point perhaps move out of this COVID experience that we're having? Okay, so there we go. And the plan is in three parts, a setup, thus, and then three practical suggestions as per the blurb for this talk, and finally a little bit of a wider context just to contextualize what I want to say. So let's kick off with part one, and that's just going to be in three parts itself, background to what I'm talking about, some indirect inspirations for these suggestions at the heart of this presentation, and a couple of caveats as well. So the background is familiar, I'm sure. COVID-19 is with us, and that means that online delivery has become the norm. So in addition to the many sort of practical and pedagogical changes that have arisen as a result of that, and are well on the way to being solved, or at least responded to in some way in my experience, but there is the additional question of the loss of the target language host culture, which I have had commented upon to me by students and tutors alike. So that is a result of the circumstances we find ourselves in, that students are not moving around there, wherever it may be, New Zealand, Australia, here in the UK where I am, any Anglophone context, and of course this applies obviously to other languages, goes without saying, but we're talking about English now. They're not experiencing that face-to-face, that daily experience of the target language host culture. So we conclude that e-teaching in the COVID era is more than simply adapting or modifying a course to be online. It is that, of course, and that's kind of pretty substantial modification in my view. But it also involves modifying in the sense of integrating and or simulating the whole experience of developing a second language, including hopefully the target language host culture. That takes, I'll just repeat the central question for clarity there. So that takes me or us to that question. How can we simulate that if we believe that the daily experience of an Anglophone context is of value, which I certainly do myself? There's the background. Here's a few indirect inspirations for where I'm coming at things by way of, I don't know, some kind of contextualization, let's say. I don't know if people know John Corbett's 2003 excellent book, in my view, An Intercultural Approach to English Language Teaching, which is really good. I like it a lot. And if you can come across that and flick through that, I think you might enjoy it. I certainly did when I encountered it, and he talks about a number of things which have informed this. Yeah. Celeste Kinginger is another hero of mine, and she's been speaking about in situ and study abroad language learning for a long time. That's a feed into how we're thinking about things here. Another is my own dalliances in the world of language learning in various ways over time. I might touch on a couple of anecdotes from that as we go on. More sort of centrally to the day job, as it were, is the experience of co-leading a COVID-19 era 6-week course over summer just passed, and student and tutor comments on that, which I think in part were in relation to what I'm trying to say here. I've been watching students engaging or not engaging in various ways with the target language host culture over many years. I take a great interest in that myself. Try in some senses to kind of invite them, or even persuade them is slightly too strong, but indicate to them how they could do that in the pre-COVID world, and that's where there's a kind of an interest for me there, and I'm slowly not doing a PhD in this sort of thing as well. So those are some of the indirect inspirations. Finally, in this quick introduction, 3 caveats. As I've just said, this is a kind of drawn from sustained experience, I hope, I think, and trained intuition and reflection, etc., with a degree of input from recognized research, but I'm not talking about something that is directly or empirically motivated here. I haven't done these things that I'm about to suggest in the sense of having integrated them into a course myself yet, although I should say I've kind of done bits of them over the years with students. I think I've noted that just in the previous slide, and also myself, I've done them in my own language learning, and other people have done them, as I think we're probably aware. Okay, so what we've said so far is simply that in the COVID era, I'm suggesting that we're doing more than simply reconfiguring courses. We've got to try and get some sense of the target language host culture simulated in the e-delivery. So let's go to those 3 suggestions for that, which I think are probably the heart of this. Here we go, 3 suggestions. They are 4 C's is the acronym for the first one. E-tripping is the second, and pairing it up is the third. Let's kick off with suggestion 1, 4 C's: city, county, country, and culture. So it seems to me that if one is studying in Leeds, for example, virtually, then we want our students to live in e-Leeds, as per the title of this presentation, taking Leeds where I am based as the example. And e-living in e-town then implies knowing about it, interacting with it, and feeling at home in it. Is it at home or at home? I don't know. But there we go. That's a different presentation, perhaps. In my own language learning, I just referenced that briefly. I mess around in Spanish a lot, and recently, because of COVID, that's all gone online, and I've been able to join groups based in America, specifically in Pennsylvania and in Chicago. So I speak Spanish with a group of Americans based in Chicago on a weekly basis, and as a result of that, I've come to know Chicago a little bit. Why not? Well, I have to, because they're there. I'm the only Chicago resident in that group, and I've come to know and understand a lot more about Chicago despite having never visited it. That seems to me to carry over somewhat to our attempts to instruct and to guide and teach our students in these contexts. So I propose the following. I suggest that at least 1 hour a week of simple discussion, exploration, reading about, learning about the city, the county, the country, and the culture where the student is e-studying. And I'm proposing that be our first suggestion, or my first suggestion, for how to perhaps simulate the experience of not being here. How could that be done? Well, a million ways, of course, but possibly a combination of just teacher-led presentation of these 4 C's, which would inspire perhaps or lead to small groups of students finding out about some of the elements of the e-town, or some of the elements of the town, and reporting, or city, and reporting back. So to take a case study of Leeds, where I find myself at the moment, I've delivered bits of, well, we've done this in various ways in the pre-COVID era over the years, and what I've suggested or explored, or themes or topics are given there, some of them. Let's take a moment to just look at that. So I don't know how that looks to people. The first one is sort of fairly kind of obvious in a sense. It's places that you would want students to perhaps sort of attend or go to. Certainly the arts venues of Leeds offer good entertainment and stuff in the pre-COVID world. If people are aware of Louis Le Prince, who was a early pioneer of the moving picture, he was French national but lived in the UK, indeed in Leeds in the late 1880s, and some of the earliest moving pictures are, two of them are of Leeds, Roundy Garden and the bridge in Leeds. So those have been sort of a nugget to explore with students. In terms of the county, Leeds is in West Yorkshire. There's stuff about the counties and the one riding, the East Riding of Yorkshire, so-called, to explore. Rivers, national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty, and motorways, A roads, bridges, and indeed the 36 bus from Leeds to Ripon via Harrogate. I've mentioned that, indeed used that as stuff to work with. So that's, I guess, city and county, and country and culture, I'm sure, are very intuitive at this point, you know, just Northern Ireland, England, Wales and Scotland, accents of the constituent countries, key festivals. At the cultural level, the list is endless, of course. So those are some of the kind of the content that I might see being explored. And to just rationalize or comment on that, for me, this would be a non-assessed component. I think there's more than enough for a curriculum here, by which I mean, you know, a progressive delivery within an EAP course. I said an hour a week a moment ago, so let's take that as a possible way of doing it, but that hour could easily be filled with this sort of stuff. Resources, of course, for students in China, then not all the resources or the sites that might necessarily be go-to places in a UK context may work, but there are plenty of analogues for those maps, and YouTube has an analogue called Youku, of course, in China. So resources are not a problem as I see it. And then I ask the question whether universities or university language centres might want to start to develop their own resource bank if this suggestion were to be taken forward in a sustained or robust way, and therefore have their own, you know, in-house 4Cs material which could speak to the delivery of a course online, which would help integrate students or expose them to certainly the city, county, country and culture despite being elsewhere. Okay, there's suggestion one. Suggestion two is just an extension of it in my mind, in a sense, so very much informed by by Corbett's work that I referenced a moment ago. Here's the notional task. You, the student that is going to Scarborough, which happens to be a town on the east coast of North Yorkshire for the weekend. How are you going to get there? Where are you going to stay? What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Present your trip. So there's the task in a nutshell. Obviously that if a student is based not in the UK and has never been to Scarborough, of course, there's a great deal of research to do there, perhaps, or some research, certainly, of a practical nature. Yeah, so it might be modelled by, in a delivery of this, one might want to perhaps model it, first of all, to give a clear indication of what's being suggested in the task, perhaps take them on a day e-trip to somewhere, for example, Knaresborough and Harrogate, relatively close to Leeds, and just do the same thing as an example, where to go, what to do, develop an itinerary. And in the context of that, one, of course, might sort of draft, perform, sketch out some dialogues that one might encounter in the context of taking a day or a weekend trip somewhere. You might go into a shop and speak to the shopkeeper. You might meet a stranger on the street and ask a direction. You might pop into tourist information and have a kind of overview talk about where to go, and other dialogues suggest themselves as well. So I feel that this is an arena in which to do a lot of substantial amount of very useful language work, perhaps parallel to, I think the impression is, I hope the picture is forming, parallel to traditional EAP delivery, but perhaps feeding into it as well to some degree. Okay, so that's, and then a commentary on that briefly. So again, for me, it will be a non-assessed task, a non-assessed component, but that's of course up for discussion. It's quite a substantial task. There's a lot of research there, inquiring degree of student agency, which are noted in the previous talk, group work if required, if done in groups. And I just put out there, could this be supported by, say, foreign language assistants, whatever terminology we use for that role? Okay, yeah, okay, so there's suggestion two, a little bit more a bit rounder, a bit more substantial, with a bit more prep to it and some good resourcing to it. But again, I think a way of simulating the experience of being in the Anglophone context. Suggestion 3 is a little bit more radical. It's still more infrastructure needed, and the suggestion is this in point 2, to pair up non-UK based students with home students and invite them to meet once a week to talk, perhaps, and somehow construct something around that, training, guidance, to both the home students and the non-UK based students in order to facilitate that and make that a successful experience. That, of course, is, I'm well aware, not a quick fix solution. It will need a great deal of planning. There's compliance issues. We need to establish some buy-in. There's a lot of setup, procedures, documentation, comms, and the cooperation of enough home students, native speakers or expert users to get that off the ground. But hopefully, as an idea, I hope it's not entirely off-piste, and there's something there which, as I think of it, you know, as an idea, simply, it's got potential, I think, to speak to some of the challenges that COVID places on the students who are not able to come here. Okay, so that's the 3 suggestions for simulating the absence of the target language host culture in COVID-19 era delivery. 2 are a little more straightforward there. We can kind of, in a sense, get on with them if we wish to on our courses. But the 3rd one, I think, is a little bit more, a bit richer, and would need some more institutional buy-in. Okay, so there's lots of details to work out. I haven't, as I say, these are not kind of done yet, certainly not by me, but perhaps worth doing. That's, I guess that's what I believe at this point. Worth trying, certainly. Okay, so the final part today, part 3, is just putting this in context of something called EQP, which I'll talk about in a moment, and looking ahead beyond COVID-19 era teaching as per the theme of this conference. So we're going to talk about EAP and EQP. That stands for English for quotidian purposes. I tend to say quotidian, just because that's how I first pronounce the word. So I'll carry on saying that, even though I understand that the standard pronunciation of that is quotidian, but I say quotidian. Hope that's okay. And yes, so enduring lessons for the return to normal. Okay, fine. So a year ago, Edward Chazal and myself, with a number of other people, found ourselves down in London and at the BALEAP PIM down in Goldsmiths. And as it happened, both Edward and myself presented sort of relatively similar presentations by chance. And his was called EAP squared or EAP2, and mine was called EQP. And without wanting to sort of necessarily put words into Edward's mouth here, I hope this is a legitimate presentation of what I understood him to say. We both, these 2 presentations both took the view perhaps that there can be a degree of narrowness to EAP as it can sometimes manifest itself, and that those 2 proposals, EAP squared and EQP, were trying to offer a broader, wider language training provision. That's not to turn away from, let's say, 4 skills based EAP or whatever, however you want to think of it, but just to put a halo around it of additional additional stuff in slightly different ways. And to turn to my own contribution, there is EQP, English for quotidian purposes. That was characterized as being about colloquial language, some of the sort of study of the sociophonetics of UK accents and world Englishes, strong focus on interactional competence for daily living, so being able to go into supermarkets, get onto buses, go into art centres, go travelling around and have a degree of confidence regarding interactional competence and all that involves, which is a big discussion outside the purposes of this. And then some of the things that we maybe touched on today: media, music, culture, community, and these suggestions, or 2 of the suggestions I've made here, the 4 C's and tripping and so on, maybe fit into that. So as I see it, the suggestions I've made have a sort of a context there, from myself and Edward and others perhaps as well. So when we return to normal, what have we done and learned in the COVID-19 era that can be continued and developed if we're looking ahead? And if we're back in, students are back in the UK and we're, you know, as it were, life has returned to normal, I wonder if the lessons or the suggestions, let me say, that I'm making here were to be adopted, could they continue to be adopted even back in a non-e-delivery world? So I guess that raises the broader question then of EQP, or whatever complements we think there might be to standard EAP. Could they play a greater role? And the suggestions I've made may not just be relevant to this period of time, although perhaps motivated by it, or in my head the thoughts about them have been motivated by this era, but I think they perhaps go beyond it. All right, I think I've said what I want to say. Here's some questions for yourselves. If you don't want to ask me anything, you don't. People are welcome to send an email to me. But there's some questions that I have for yourselves, perhaps, and for me, I stress.